If you could just sit near the edge of the arbor, Marcus. Out of the primary frame, Vanessa whispered, her fingers nervously tightening around her white lace bouquet. She didn't look into my eyes. Her focus was entirely on the photographer's lens, then on the polished teak floor of the estate conservatory. The wheels they clash with the whole vintage aesthetic. We want these pictures to look clean, like something out of a magazine. I looked down at the matte black carbon fiber frame of my chair, then back up at the woman I had just taken vows with in front of 80 people. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply nodded, engaging the handrim to roll myself back 2 feet into the cool shadow of the velvet drapery. "Thanks, sweetie," she murmured, already turning her glowing smile back toward the camera as her bridesmaids lined up beside her. "All right, Mark, take the shot now while the lighting is perfect." I sat in the dim light near the potted palms, listening to the high-pitched shudder of the camera and the laughter of her friends. I reached into my coat pocket, my thumb naturally finding the smooth, worn edges of a heavy brass coin I always carried. I had survived 36 hours trapped beneath a wrecked armored vehicle in 100-degree heat while holding off an enemy ambush with a shattered collarbone and a single working arm. I had learned to breathe through cracked ribs and live with titanium rods holding my lower spine together, but sitting at the margin of my own wedding reception, watching my bride treat me like an unwanted piece of furniture, cut deeper than any piece of jagged metal ever had. She had no idea who I really was. She thought she had married a quiet, broken former desk clerk who lived on a modest government disability check and spent his days reading historical novels. She thought my silence was weakness, and my humility was just low self-esteem. And she certainly had no idea what was going to happen in 2 hours, when her multi-billionaire CEO boss finally arrived at the reception, walked through those glass doors, and saw who was sitting in that chair. The morning had started with subtle warnings I had tried my best to ignore. We were getting married at the Grandview Manor, an exclusive hilltop estate overlooking the valley. It was the kind of venue with white marble fountains, manicured boxwood hedges, and sweeping staircases designed for grand entrances. It was also the kind of venue that had spent 3 generations ignoring accessibility. When we first did the walkthrough 4 months ago, I had noticed the 6 stone steps leading up to the main ballroom. I had quietly asked the venue manager about a portable ramp. Vanessa's mother, Evelyn, had scoffed right in front of the coordinator. "Oh, Marcus, a wooden ramp across the grand entrance? It will look like a construction site. Can't your brother just lift you up the steps? It's only 6 steps. It won't take more than 10 seconds. My brother Ethan had offered to do it without hesitation, but I had seen the look in Vanessa's eyes that day, a flash of annoyance, a slight tightening of her jaw. She didn't want people seeing her husband being hoisted up a flight of stairs like a piece of heavy luggage. To her, every accommodation was a reminder that her life wasn't matching the pristine, effortless image she curated on her social media feeds. I had spent $6,000 of my own savings to have a custom, low-profile mahogany ramp built for the side entrance, painted to match the estate's exterior trim so it wouldn't ruin the visual line of the main building. I didn't complain. I paid the carpenter, thanked him, and kept my mouth shut. Inside the groom's suite that morning, Ethan had helped me adjust my tie. He was 3 years younger than me, built broad, with the same steady blue eyes our father had passed down to both of us. "You okay, man?" Ethan asked, smoothing the shoulders of my charcoal suit jacket. "You've been quiet all morning." "Just thinking," I said, adjusting the cuffs of my crisp white shirt. "Look, Marcus, I know how Vanessa's family can be," Ethan said, dropping his voice as he pulled up a folding chair to sit eye to eye with me. "Her mom's been running around complaining about the valet parking and the sound system for 3 hours. And Vanessa, she's stressed. But today is about you two. Don't let them make you feel small." I looked down at my hands. The knuckles were scarred, the skin weathered. "I don't feel small, Ethan. I just wonder sometimes if she sees me, or if she sees a project she thinks she can redecorate." "Why haven't you told her?" Ethan asked softly, his tone laced with genuine frustration. "Why haven't you pulled out the wooden box from under your bed and shown her what's inside? Why let her think you were just some low-level clerk who got hurt in a vehicle accident on a base in Texas? Because if someone only values you for the medals on your chest, they don't value you at all," I replied quietly. "I wanted a normal life, Ethan. I wanted a home, a quiet marriage, a place where I didn't have to be the man from the news reports. When I met Vanessa at the community center 2 years ago, she was sweet, she was warm, she listened to me talk about books and gardening. I thought she loved the man sitting in front of her. And now? Ethan asked. Before I could answer, the door to the groom's suite flew open. Evelyn stepped inside, her mother of the bride lilac dress swishing loudly against her ankles. She held a glass of champagne in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Ethan, good, you're here," Evelyn said without greeting me. "The photographer needs the groomsmen out on the south lawn right now. We need to get the men's group shots done before the heat picks up." "Sure thing, Mrs. Vance," Ethan said, standing up. He looked down at me. "Let's roll, Marcus." "Oh, wait," Evelyn said, holding up a manicured hand to stop us. She squinted at my chair, then at my suit. "Marcus, the south lawn has that thick Bermuda grass. The wheels are going to sink right into the sod and leave deep tracks in the lawn. The venue supervisor said they just rolled that turf on Thursday." I looked at her, keeping my voice completely even. "Evelyn, the turf is dry. The chair weighs less than 50 pounds. "Still," she insisted, waving her hand dismissively. "It's better if you stay on the paved patio for now. We'll take the individual photos of you and Vanessa on the terrace later. We don't want mud on your tires when you roll into the chapel, do we? It would look so messy." Ethan's face turned bright red. "Evelyn, he's the groom. He's supposed to be in the groomsmen photos on the lawn." "Ethan, it's fine," I said quietly, reaching out to touch my brother's wrist. "Go ahead. I'll wait on the terrace." "Marcus?" "No," Ethan started, but I gave him a firm look. "Go on," I repeated. Ethan glared at Evelyn, muttered something under his breath, and walked out the door. Evelyn gave me a tight, artificial smile, took a sip of her champagne, and followed him out, leaving me alone in the quiet room. I sat there in the stillness, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. I reached into my pocket again, feeling the heavy brass coin. What Evelyn didn't know, what Vanessa didn't know, was that 3 months ago, a courier from the Department of Defense had driven up to my modest home in Ohio to deliver a heavy white envelope. Inside was a formal invitation to a private ribbon-cutting ceremony at the Pentagon for a new veterans facility named in my honor. Attached to the invitation was a handwritten note from a retired 4-star general that read, "Marcus, your country remembers what you did, even if you chose to step into the shadows. We are ready whenever you are." I had put the letter back into the envelope, placed it inside the lockbox beneath my bed, and never mentioned it to Vanessa. I had wanted to believe she loved me for the quiet life we were building together. Sitting alone in that room, listening to the laughter of the wedding party out on the lawn, a cold, heavy truth began to settle in my chest. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of soft music, bright flowers, and polite smiles. I had waited at the front of the chapel beside the floral altar, watching Vanessa walk down the aisle on her uncle's arm. She looked stunning in her ivory gown, her dark hair styled in soft waves, her smile radiant as the light filtered through the stained glass windows. For a few fleeting minutes, as we exchanged our vows, I thought I saw the woman I had fallen in love with. She looked into my eyes, her hand trembling slightly in mine as she spoke the words about richer or poorer, sickness and health. But the moment the official pronouncement was made, and the minister said, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Thorne," the illusion began to fracture. As we turned to head back down the aisle, Vanessa didn't walk beside my chair as we had practiced during the rehearsal. Instead, she took a quick, elongated stride ahead of me, holding her dress train up with both hands, moving at a pace that forced me to push my hand rims double time just to stay behind her. To the guests sitting in the pews, it looked like a bride eagerly rushing toward her future. But to me, it felt like she was trying to create distance between herself and the man rolling behind her. When we reached the patio for the post-ceremony photos, the subtle exclusion became explicit. "Okay, family shots," Mark, the photographer, called out, adjusting his broad-brimmed hat. "Let's get the bride, the groom, and the bride's parents up against the stone archway." The archway was elevated by 2 shallow decorative stone steps. There was no ramp leading up to the platform, just 2 steps surrounded by thick ivy. Ethan immediately stepped forward. "Hold on, Mark. Let me help Marcus up those 2 steps so he can be in the center under the arch." "Oh, don't worry about it," Evelyn chimed in quickly, stepping between Ethan and the platform. We can just do a few photos of Vanessa with me and her father up under the arch first. It'll save Marcus the hassle of transferring out of his chair. It's no hassle, Mrs. Vance, Ethan said, his voice rising in frustration. I can lift him up in 5 seconds. Ethan, please, don't make a fuss, Vanessa said, her voice dropping into that tight, sharp tone she used when she was trying to exert control. She turned to me, her eyes pleading, but not with love, with embarrassment. Marcus, sweetie, why don't you let us take a few traditional family shots up here first? Then we'll come down to the paved path and take some with you. Traditional family shots? Ethan repeated, incredulous. Vanessa, he's your husband. He is your family. Ethan, let it go, I said softly. No, Marcus, I'm not going to let them treat you like a guest at your own wedding, Ethan snapped, turning to face Vanessa. He paid for half of this venue. He paid for that arch you're standing under. Ethan, I repeated, louder this time, my voice carrying a quiet authority that made my brother freeze. I looked at him steadily. I said, let it go. Ethan clenched his jaws, his fists shaking at his sides. He glared at Vanessa, then at her mother, before stepping back onto the grass. For the next 45 minutes, I sat on the paved patio while the photographer took dozens of photos. There were photos of Vanessa with her bridesmaids on the steps, photos of Vanessa with her high school friends on the lawn, photos of Vanessa with her mother and uncle under the floral arch. Whenever I was included in a shot, the photographer carefully angled his lens to frame me from the chest up, hiding the wheels of my chair behind large potted ferns, or asking Vanessa to stand directly in front of my left arm to obscure the metal frame. Just lean a little forward, Marcus, the photographer directed, looking through his viewfinder. Yeah, like that. Now, Vanessa, lean over him from behind. Perfect. That way the background stays uniform. He wasn't trying to capture our love. He was trying to erase my disability from the record of our wedding day. And Vanessa allowed every single bit of it. In fact, she guided it. Mark, Vanessa whispered to the photographer during a brief pause, not realizing I was sitting 3 feet behind her near the marble bench. Make sure for the album cover shot, it's the one where I'm sitting on the bench and Marcus is leaning against the stone pillar. You can't even tell the chair is there in that one. It looks so much more natural. The photographer nodded. Got it, Mrs. Thorne. We'll make sure the album looks seamless. I sat in the afternoon heat, feeling the warm breeze rustling the leaves of the oak trees overhead. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. A deep, crystalline clarity settled over my mind. I remembered sitting in a military hospital room 8 years ago, listening to a team of orthopedic surgeons tell me that I would never walk again. I remembered the long, agonizing months of physical therapy, learning how to transfer myself, how to navigate a world built for people on 2 legs, how to rebuild my dignity from scratch. I had thought the hardest battle of my life was fought in the mountains of Afghanistan. I was wrong. The hardest battle was standing, or sitting, in front of people who claimed to love you, while they quietly disassembled your worth piece by piece to protect their vanity. Marcus? I looked up. It was my sister-in-law, Clara, Ethan's wife. She was holding 2 glass flutes of sparkling cider, her face filled with quiet sympathy. She handed one to me. Hey, Clara, I said, offering a small smile. They're being awful, Marcus, she said bluntly, sitting down on the wooden chair beside me. Ethan is ready to throw Richard into the fountain. I had to physically hold his belt 5 minutes ago. I took a small sip of the cider. Ethan has a good heart. He gets protective. He has every right to be, Clara said fiercely. You deserve to be in the middle of every single photo. You're the groom. You're an incredible man. What Vanessa and her mother are doing? It's shameful. People show you who they are when they think there are no consequences for their behavior, Clara, I said softly, looking out across the lawn where Vanessa was posing with her corporate friends. Today, I'm seeing who she really is. Are you going to be okay? She asked softly. I reached into my pocket, my thumb gliding across the brass coin. I'm going to be fine, Clara, I said, my voice steady as granite. The reception hasn't even started yet. The main ballroom of Grandview Manor was an elaborate display of gold-rimmed glassware, white linen tablecloths, and towering crystal centerpieces filled with white roses. As the 80 guests filtered into the room, taking their seats at the round tables, I noticed the floor plan layout for the first time. The head table, a long, elevated riser covered in white velvet, sat at the front of the room beneath a grand chandelier. It was where the bride, groom, maid of honor, and best man were supposed to sit, overlooking the entire room. However, 3 wooden steps led up to the riser. There was no ramp. Instead of putting up the portable wooden ramp I had paid for, a small 2-person table had been set up on the main floor, placed far to the right side of the room, near the double doors leading to the commercial kitchen. Evelyn caught me looking at the setup. She walked over, tapping her fingernails against her glass. "Marcus, dear," Evelyn said smoothly, her eyes avoiding mine. "We realized late yesterday that putting a ramp up to the head table would block the main walkway for the catering staff. So we set up a private, intimate head table for you and Vanessa right down here. It's actually much closer to the dance floor." It wasn't closer to the dance floor. It was right next to the tray jack station where the waiters stacked dirty plates. "Evelyn," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "the catering walkway is 6 feet wide. The ramp is 2 feet wide." She flushed slightly, her smile tightening. "Well, the decision was made, Marcus. Vanessa thought it was for the best. We want the service to run smoothly tonight. We have very important guests coming." "Right," I said quietly. "The executive team from Vance Global Logistics." "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice instantly lifting with pride. "Arthur Vance himself is coming. Do you have any idea what a coup that is for Vanessa's career? Having the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar international logistics firm attend her wedding? If she makes a great impression tonight, she could be promoted to senior regional director by the end of the quarter. We cannot have any chaos or logistical eyesores ruining the evening." "Logistical eyesores?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. Evelyn realized what she had said, her eyes widening slightly, but she didn't apologize. She simply cleared her throat, adjusted her silver necklace, and walked away toward table 1, the primary VIP table, situated directly in front of the stage. Ethan walked over 2 minutes later, his face thunderous. "They put you by the kitchen doors," Ethan nearly yelled. "Marcus, that's it. We're moving the table. You and I are dragging a table right to the center of the room." "No, Ethan," I said, placing my hand firmly on his forearm. "Leave it exactly where it is." "Why?" Ethan demanded, his voice trembling with rage. "Why are you taking this? This isn't you, Marcus. You used to command men. You used to stand up to people who thought they were God Almighty. Why are you letting these fake, superficial snobs walk all over you?" I looked at my brother. I loved him for his fire, but he didn't understand. "When you're in a combat zone, Ethan," I said, my voice dropping into a low, measured tone that silenced him instantly, "you don't fire your weapon just because the enemy makes noise in the tree line. You wait until they step into the open. You wait until you see the full picture. Let them lay their traps. Let them show everyone in this room exactly who they are." Ethan stared at me, his eyes widening slightly as he recognized the old intensity returning to my face. The passive, quiet demeanor I had worn all morning was slipping away, replaced by the cold, tactical patience of a man who had commanded troops under fire. "What are you going to do?" Ethan whispered. "I'm going to sit at my table," I said simply. "I'm going to enjoy my dinner. And then I'm going to let the evening play out." The reception officially began at 6:30 p.m. Vanessa spent the first hour floating from table to table, laughing with her colleagues from Vance Global Logistics, taking selfies with her college friends, and sipping expensive white wine. She came over to our small table near the kitchen doors exactly twice, once to drop off her bouquet, and once to tell me that dinner service was starting. "Make sure you try the salmon, sweetie," she said quickly, barely glancing at me as she adjusted her lipstick in a small compact mirror. "Oh, has Mr. Vance arrived yet? Did you see him come in?" "I haven't seen him, Vanessa," I said quietly. "Ugh, he said he might be late because of his flight from Washington," she muttered, looking anxiously toward the main entrance doors. "I really hope he makes it." I had the catering staff prepare a special dry-aged ribeye just for his table. She didn't ask if I liked my meal. She didn't ask how my back was holding up after 6 hours of sitting in the chair. She turned on her heel and glided back toward table 1 to sit with her corporate peers. I sat alone at the small table by the kitchen doors, watching the waiters carry heavy trays of food past my shoulder. Every few minutes, someone from the wedding would look over at me with a mix of pity and confusion. They could see the groom sitting isolated near the service doors, while his bride held court at the front of the room. At 7:45 p.m., the maid of honor, Chloe, took the microphone on the stage to give her speech. "Good evening, everyone!" Chloe beamed, her voice echoing through the speakers. For those who don't know me, I'm Chloe, Vanessa's best friend since freshman year at Ohio State. The room cheered politely. Chloe launched into a 10-minute speech about Vanessa's ambition, her career success, her impeccable taste, and her drive to achieve perfection in everything she touched. And then, Vanessa met Marcus, Chloe said, turning her gaze toward my table near the kitchen. Her tone shifted from energetic to soft, patronizing sympathy. When Vanessa first told us she was dating Marcus, we were all so moved. Vanessa has always had such a big heart. Taking on a relationship like this, knowing the extra care, the patience, and the unique challenges that come with someone in Marcus's situation, it just shows what an selfless, extraordinary woman she is. A few people in the room clapped softly, looking back at me with sympathetic smiles. Chloe continued, her words dripping with condescension. Vanessa has shown us all what true charity and devotion look like. She stepped up to be Marcus's rock, his caregiver, and his partner, despite everything. Let's raise a glass to Vanessa, a woman who proves that true love doesn't care about limitations. The crowd raised their glasses. To Vanessa! I sat motionless at my table. Unbelievable, Ethan muttered from the table behind me, his voice shaking. She just framed marrying you as an act of public charity. I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket, my fingers wrapping tightly around the brass coin. Why did I carry that coin every single day? Because 8 years ago, in a dusty medical tent in Ramadi, a 4-star general had pressed that exact coin into my blood-stained palm while I lay on a gurney with 3 bullet wounds in my chest and a crushed spine. Master Sergeant Thorne, the general had said, his eyes filled with tears as he looked down at me. You held that ridge for 40 minutes alone. You saved 64 young men today. This country will never be able to repay the debt we owe you. I had never shown that coin to Vanessa. I had never told her about the 64 men whose lives I had saved. I had wanted her to love Marcus the man, not Marcus the hero. Now, sitting in the quiet corner of this ballroom, listening to her friend call our marriage an act of charity, I realized the terrible truth. Vanessa didn't love Marcus the man either. She saw me as an inconvenience, a liability she had graciously accepted to make herself look like a saint in front of her friends. And then, at 8:15 p.m., the heavy mahogany double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. A tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s stepped into the room. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, a silver silk tie, and carried himself with the effortless, formidable authority of a man used to running multi-billion-dollar global operations. He had short, steel-gray hair, cut in a precise military style, a sharp jawline, and eyes that moved across the room with intense, calculated speed. Behind him walked 2 younger men in dark suits carrying leather briefcases, his executive aides. It was Arthur Vance, CEO of Vance Global Logistics, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, one of the most powerful corporate leaders in the country. The room immediately fell into a quiet hush. Vanessa's eyes lit up with intense excitement. She practically leapt out of her chair at table 1, smoothing her ivory dress, grabbing her glass of champagne, and frantically gesturing to her mother. "He's here!" Vanessa whispered loudly to Evelyn. "Come on." Evelyn quickly adjusted her hair, putting on her most dazzling corporate smile as she fell in behind her daughter. Arthur Vance smiled politely as he entered, waving a hand to indicate that people should continue eating and celebrating. He turned toward the head table area, looking for the bride. Vanessa hurried across the polished dance floor, her heels clicking crisply against the wood. "Mr. Vance?" Vanessa called out, her voice dripping with warm, eager respect. "Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We are so honored to have you here tonight." Arthur Vance turned toward her, offering a warm, professional handshake. "Congratulations, Vanessa. I'm sorry I couldn't make the ceremony. The flight out of Andrews Air Force Base was delayed by weather." Oh, please, don't apologize at all. Vanessa beamed, her eyes sparkling with ambition. We are just thrilled you could make it for the reception. Please, let me introduce you to my mother, Evelyn, and then I want to take you over to meet our executive team. Of course. Arthur Vance smiled politely, shaking Evelyn's hand. A lovely venue, Mrs. Vance. Thank you, Mr. Vance, Evelyn purred. We spent months ensuring every detail was absolutely perfect. Arthur Vance scanned the room, looking past the flower arrangements and the crystal chandeliers. And where is the groom? I'd like to pay my respects to your new husband, Vanessa. Vanessa's smile hesitated for a tiny fraction of a second. She gestured vaguely toward the far right corner of the room, near the kitchen doors. Oh, Marcus is right over there, Vanessa said softly, her tone instantly shifting to that gentle, patronizing tone she had used all evening. He's sitting at our private side table. Poor thing gets tired so easily with his mobility situation. We set up a quiet spot for him near the service area so he wouldn't be overwhelmed by the crowd. Arthur Vance frowned slightly, a tiny furrow appearing between his silver eyebrows. Mobility situation? Yes, Vanessa sighed softly, shaking her head with manufactured sympathy. He uses a wheelchair. He was in a small accident years ago when he was doing some administrative work. It's been very difficult for him, but, we manage. I make sure he's taken care of. Arthur Vance looked over toward the kitchen doors. At first, he couldn't see the man clearly because a waiter was carrying a tray past the table. Marcus Thorne sat in his matte black chair, his posture straight as a steel rod, his hand resting quietly on the white tablecloth. Arthur took 3 slow steps across the dance floor to get a clearer angle. The bright light from the sidewall sconce struck Marcus's face. Arthur Vance stopped dead in his tracks. The smile on the CEO's face completely vanished. His eyes widened until they were stretched to their absolute limits. The glass of sparkling water he was holding in his right hand began to tilt, the liquid sloshing over the crystal rim, dripping onto his immaculate leather shoes. He didn't notice the water. He didn't notice Vanessa. He didn't notice the 80 guests watching him. Arthur Vance went completely, utterly pale. His mouth parted slightly, his breath catching in his chest with a sharp, audible gasp that carried across the quiet edge of the dance floor. Vanessa blinked, looking from her boss to her husband in complete confusion. Mr. Vance? Are you all right? Arthur Vance didn't answer her. He didn't move for 5 long seconds. It was as if he had just seen a ghost standing in the middle of a wedding reception. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur handed his glass of water to his stunned executive aide standing beside him. He began to walk. He didn't walk toward the VIP table. He didn't walk toward the stage. He walked straight across the polished hardwood floor, heading directly toward the small 2-person table sitting in the dim shadow of the kitchen doors. His pace quickened with every step. His chest heaved with a deep, staggering emotion that no one in that room had ever seen on the face of the formidable corporate titan. Vanessa frantically hurried after him, her heels clicking loudly. Mr. Vance? Mr. Vance, wait! The executive table is over here. That's just the service corner. Arthur Vance ignored her completely. He marched straight up to the small table near the kitchen. Marcus Thorne looked up. His clear blue eyes met the dark gray eyes of the CEO. For a long, agonizing moment, neither man spoke. Then, Arthur Vance did something that made every single person in the room, Vanessa, Evelyn, Ethan, the bridesmaids, the waiters, and the entire executive staff of Vance Global Logistics, gasp in absolute horror and disbelief. Arthur Vance, a multi-billionaire former Assistant Secretary of Defense, dropped down onto his right knee on the hardwood floor right in front of the wheelchair. He didn't just bend down, he went down on one knee in front of Marcus Thorne, looking up into my face with tears welling in his eyes. My God, Arthur Vance whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, overwhelming reverence that shook the entire room. Master Sergeant Thorne. The entire ballroom went dead, absolute silent. The soft background jazz music coming from the speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. Vanessa froze 2 feet away, her mouth hanging open, her face completely drained of color. Her champagne glass trembled so violently in her hand that the liquid spilled onto her white lace sleeve. Mr. Vance? Vanessa stammered, her voice high-pitched and terrified. What? What are you doing? Why are you on the floor? That's just Marcus. My husband. Arthur Vance didn't look at her. He didn't even acknowledge her existence. He reached out with both hands, his trembling fingers grasping my right hand with an intensity that shook his entire frame. Master Sergeant, Arthur Vance choked out, tears finally breaking over his lower lids and tracking down his aged face. I have searched for you for 7 years. 7 years. I looked down at the man kneeling before me. A soft, quiet sigh escaped my lips. I recognized the silver hair, the sharp eyes. General Vance, I said quietly, my voice steady, calm, and resonant. It's been a long time. General! Vanessa shrieked, looking wildly between us. General! He's not a general! He's a CEO! Arthur Vance slowly pushed himself up from the floor. He turned around to face the room. When he turned, his face was no longer that of a polite corporate executive attending a wedding. It was the face of a commander, a man filled with a terrifying, righteous authority that commanded absolute, instantaneous silence from every soul in the building. Is there a microphone? Arthur Vance demanded, his voice slicing through the air like a steel blade. The DJ, wide-eyed and terrified, frantically grabbed the cordless microphone from his desk and ran across the floor, handing it to the CEO. Arthur Vance took the microphone. He stood beside my wheelchair, placing a firm, heavy hand on my shoulder. Ladies and gentlemen, Arthur Vance's voice thundered through the ballroom speakers, carrying a weight that made people in the back rows stand up from their chairs. I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I am standing tonight beside a man who represents the absolute highest standard of honor, bravery, and sacrifice this nation has ever produced. Vanessa stared at her boss, her chest heaving, her eyes darting frantically around the room as her corporate colleagues watched in stunned awe. 9 years ago, Arthur Vance continued, his voice echoing off the high plaster ceilings. During Operation Phantom Strike in the Korangal Valley of Afghanistan, a convoy of 40 American soldiers was ambushed in a narrow mountain pass. They were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire, mortar rounds, and enemy fighters holding the high ridge. The room was so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the venue's refrigerator units in the kitchen. The lead vehicle was struck by an anti-tank missile, Arthur said, his hand tightening on my shoulder, his voice trembling with emotion. Inside that vehicle was a 22-year-old second lieutenant named David Vance, my son. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. The entire unit was ordered to fall back to a defensive perimeter. Arthur choked out, tears streaming down his face. It was considered a total kill zone. Moving toward that burning vehicle was a death sentence. But one man refused to abandon my son. One man unbuckled his harness, stepped out into a hail of machine gun fire, and sprinted 200 yards across an open ridge. Arthur looked down at me, his eyes filled with endless, profound gratitude. That man was Master Sergeant Marcus Thorne, Arthur thundered. He reached that vehicle alone. He pulled my son and 2 other wounded soldiers from the wreckage. When a second mortar round exploded 10 feet away, peppering his body with shrapnel and crushing his spine, Master Sergeant Thorne did not fall. He used his own body as a shield to cover my son until the rescue helicopters could land. A loud, collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. Ethan stood near the edge of the dance floor, tears streaming down his face, his head held high with pure, unadulterated pride. Master Sergeant Thorne saved 64 lives over his 20 years of service, Arthur Vance continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, 2 Distinguished Service Crosses, and 3 Purple Hearts. He is one of only 11 living Americans to hold our nation's highest military distinction. Arthur Vance looked directly at Vanessa, his eyes cold as ice, his tone dropping into a deadly quiet intensity. 3 years ago, when I retired from the United States Army as a lieutenant general and took over Vance Global Logistics, Arthur said, looking around the room at the opulent decorations, I established a $10 million private trust to locate the man who saved my son's life. But Marcus Thorne, true to his character, refused public praise. He retired quietly to a small town, took no special favors, asked for no spotlight, and lived his life with the humble dignity of a true warrior. Arthur looked down at the tiny two-person table sitting beside the kitchen doors. Then he looked at the grand head table sitting elevated on the riser with its empty chairs. "And tonight," Arthur Vance said, his voice dropping like an anvil onto the room, "I arrive at this wedding to find the greatest hero in this country sitting in the dark beside the kitchen doors, while people who aren't worthy to tie his boots sit at the front of the room." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was deafening. Vanessa looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her face was bright red, then ghostly white, then red again. She looked at her boss. She looked at her mother. She looked at her corporate peers at table 1, all of whom were sitting with their mouths open, staring at her with looks of utter disgust and horror. Chloe, the maid of honor who had just given a speech calling Vanessa a charitable caregiver, looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Mr. Vance," Vanessa squeaked out, her voice barely a whisper, her hands shaking violently. I didn't know. He never told me." Arthur Vance turned his head slowly, looking down at Vanessa with an expression of cold, profound pity. "He shouldn't have had to tell you, Vanessa," Arthur said softly, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "A man shouldn't have to carry a medal of honor around his neck for his wife to treat him with basic human dignity." Arthur handed the microphone back to the trembling DJ. He looked down at me, taking a step back. He brought his heels together with a sharp, loud click, brought his right hand to his brow, and delivered a rigid, perfect, 3-star military salute to the man sitting in the wheelchair. In the back of the room, Ethan snapped to attention and saluted. Beside him, 3 older venue servers who were military veterans came to attention and saluted. I sat in my chair looking up at General Vance. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my right hand and returned the salute with crisp, steady perfection. When the salute ended, General Vance leaned down, speaking quietly so only I could hear. "Marcus, my private car is outside. My son David is living in Columbus. He's married now, has a little girl. He has wanted to look you in the eye and thank you for 9 years. If you want to leave this place, the door is open." I looked at Arthur Vance, then I looked at the table near the kitchen doors, then I looked at Vanessa. Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes wild with panic, tears running down her cheeks, ruining her makeup. "Marcus," she sobbed, reaching out to grasp my arm. "Marcus, please. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Please, come up to the main table. We can move the main table right now. We can retake all the photos. Mark!" she screamed across the room at the photographer. "Mark, bring your camera back. We're taking all the photos over again. Put Marcus in the center." I looked at the woman I had married 4 hours ago. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vengeance. I just felt a profound, quiet sorrow for someone who was so blind to what truly mattered in this life. I gently reached up and removed her hand from my arm. "No, Vanessa," I said softly, my voice calm, steady, and completely final. "You don't retake photos because you found out who someone is. You show who you are by how you treat them when you think they are nobody." I reached into my suit pocket one last time. I pulled out the heavy brass coin, the commander's challenge coin from Ramadi. I laid it gently on the white tablecloth of the small table by the kitchen doors. "You wanted a clean photo album, Vanessa," I said quietly, looking into her crying eyes. "You can have it." I turned my wheels. I didn't rush. I didn't look down. I rolled across the polished hardwood floor of the main ballroom, my head held high, my chest broad, moving with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who had faced the darkest valleys of the world and come out unbroken. Ethan walked alongside me on my left. General Vance walked alongside me on my right. As we reached the double mahogany doors at the back of the room, every single guest in that ballroom stood up. One by one, the quiet murmurs turned into a thunderous, roaring ovation of applause that filled the high ceilings of the estate. People were clapping, wiping tears from their eyes, standing at attention as we passed. I didn't turn back to look at the tears of the woman standing by the kitchen doors. I rolled out through the glass doors of Grandview Manor and stepped into the cool, clear night air, ready to live the rest of my life on my own terms, honored, unbowed, and completely free.